First of all, let's understand that I don't think anybody in their right mind wants a direct military confrontation with Russia. The problem is that we in the West do not see Russia as Russia is. We see it through this distorting lens. We either impute to it Soviet like attributes or evil attributes, whatever you want to call it. We tend to view it through the lens of our own notion of economic power and wealth. And you reach utterly false assumptions about Russia. Assumption number one, Russia is really weak. Russia can't stay the course. All we have to do is double down and we'll attrit them. We'll wear them out. No, it's the exact opposite. That's an impossibility, as they've demonstrated already economically. Secondly, their military is no good. It's no good because when they came in, they were soft. They didn't come in hard. They didn't do very well. They seem to have been defeated, all of which is erroneous nonsense, completely misunderstands what Putin was about, what the Russians were trying to achieve. So they believe in their heart of hearts that if we were to show up on the battlefield in Western Ukraine, cross the Polish border with Polish allies, maybe some Romanian forces too, that the Russians would be so intimidated and so afraid that they would immediately say, stop, let's stop, please don't come into this. And they're wrong. They're very wrong. In fact, there's a real appetite in Russia, to be perfectly blunt with you, to do real damage to our forces if they get the opportunity. So I think you've got a misapprehension of the danger and the level of response that it will elicit. And now we have a much larger, very different Russian army in the field. This is now a wartime theater. Ukraine is no longer being treated with kid gloves. Initially, they said, no, the Ukrainians are our brother Slavs. We don't want to harm Ukrainians. We don't want to do damage to infrastructure. We want to get along so that we can build a new peace. That's gone. The Russians now have decided there is no way to negotiate an end to this. No one will negotiate in good faith. Therefore, we must crush the enemy. That's what's coming. That's the status quo that's ruling us in Washington. They are largely divorced from reality. The Russian forces are not poorly trained. They're very well trained. As I think I mentioned before, I've watched several films that were made available to me through various sources in Europe. I was very impressed with the way the Russians operated. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, have taken such horrendous losses. They now admit to 35,000 missing. They admit to more than 100,000 killed. You start adding up the numbers, so you're looking at 150,000 plus who are dead. Now they're trying to force teenage boys at the age of 13, 14, 15 into uniform. They're now telling the disabled that you're going to be mobilized. They're literally scraping the bottom of the barrel. And we know that Russian industry is by no means on its knees. Quite the contrary, it's booming. And they're exporting more oil and gas than they ever have. They're swimming in cash. The Russian population, if anything, is far more exuberant and enthusiastic about this war than I think Putin privately would like. He's acted to restrain some of the more radical nationalist elements that would like to go in and do the equivalent of wiping Ukraine off the map. If you look at it from a 1 to 5 perspective, which is pretty much the standard right now. Of course, at this point in time, they've been killing Ukrainians, 8 Ukrainians for every 1 Russian, or 10 Ukrainians for every 1 Russian. Bakhmut has turned into a particularly terrible Ukrainian bloodbath and hugely beneficial to the Russians. Well, actually, it's not frozen throughout Ukraine. Right now, during the day in southern Ukraine, this is down near Odessa, Kherson, it rises to about 34 degrees during the day and drops down to about 20 at night. So you still have standing water in those trenches. So the South is not ready to support large quantities of tractor wheeled vehicles. The North is absolutely frozen solid, but it looks more and more as though the Russians would like to complete their task in Donbass first. Remember, this was always an economy of force measure. It was designed to grind up as many Ukrainians as possible at the lowest possible cost to the Russians. It's worked brilliantly. When the offensives are launched, it will be a very different battle. These people are at the end of their tether. And they told the people at the CIA, they told the people in the Pentagon, they told the people in the White House, if you don't come in and rescue us, we are going to be annihilated. We are not going to withstand what is coming. They're not fools. They know what's coming. We have satellite coverage. We've shown them the pictures. They know what kind of force is going to attack. Sometime in January, early February at the latest, is a war-winning offensive designed to terminate the conflict. We are the ones that keep saying no negotiation. We're the ones that say unconditional surrender to you, Mr. Putin. That was effectively Lindsey Graham's comment. Mr. Putin, unless you go out in the middle of Red Square and shoot yourself through the head and commit suicide, there can be no negotiated settlement. This is absurd.
They have an expectation, I believe, especially after the Soviet Union fell, that the West would welcome them. That's not what happened. And I think there's a shock in Russia that the West has rejected them for the dumbest of reasons, rejected them based upon fear-based ignorance, rejected them because of politics. And so when you say peace, it no longer means what it used to mean, because peace is no longer peaceful coexistence with the West. The West has rejected Russia. The West has said no. The mobilization in support of the special military operation is capped at 300,000. So the reserves that were mobilized, that's it. Russian politicians at every level have said there won't be a second round of mobilization. There's no need for a second round. So there's people out there saying, oh, Russia needs more troops. They need this, they need that. There's the 300,000 plus the troops that were already there, plus a significant number of volunteers that have been mobilized. I think the Russians will have, again, the final number is probably classified, but the Russians will have somewhere between 600, 700,000 troops available in the special military operation zone of operations to carry out whatever they're going to do next. You mentioned the number of 1.5 million. That is the strategic vision of Russia now moving forward. They're expanding their overall military to 1.5 million. Many of these will be conscripts, others will be contract soldiers. Every conscript who is conscripted will be given an opportunity to sign a contract. They are building new groups of forces. Of course, they have one that we already see coming into play in Belarus, combined Russian-Belarusian group of force. They are building a new force that'll be opposite of Finland. Thank you, Finland and Sweden, for talking about joining NATO. Now you're going to pay the price. Russia's building up a military capability there that you'll have to respond to. They're going to beef up existing capabilities. They're going to increase the size of their airborne forces and their marine forces. Why? Well, because airborne and marine forces are expeditionary forces, meaning that you can, have them based here, but they're readily capable of being deployed elsewhere. So Russia is anticipating a future where they will need to project military power to meet threats from other areas. And the forces that are most capable of projecting this power, the most expeditionary forces, are their airborne and their marine forces, who have shown themselves to be extraordinarily tough, capable fighters in the special military operation. Everybody who says Russia's been looking for a fight, no, their military is not organized for the kind of aggressive posturing that everybody claims Russia is seeking to do. Russia is a very large nation. It requires a very large military to protect its varied and geographically dispersed national security interests. But it is a defensive posture, So what Russia leadership is saying is, we recognize that we live in a different world. And it's a world that's going to require us to have the force structure capable of responding to different threats. So more expeditionary forces and more heavy destructive forces, conventional, the artillery, so that if the West wants a fight, we'll be able to match them anywhere they want to have the fight, and we'll be able to prevail. The Russians are preparing for the future. And the other thing that they're doing is they're not just expanding the military, but they're expanding the military industrial capacity to meet the demands of this new expanded military. But they're doing it not in a panicked fashion. It is in a measured fashion. Putin, when he gave his speech, said, and I'm paraphrasing again, but he said, this isn't about trading guns for butter. I'm not asking the Russian people to sacrifice, to tighten their belts. No, we're not going there. We are building our economy. Life will be normal. We're just saying that we are going to emphasize more defense industry than we have in the past. But it's not panicked. It's very measured. It's part of normalcy. This is becoming the normal for Russia to have expanded military industry capable of sustaining a 1.5 million person force with modern weaponry, modern technology, et cetera. The point I want to make is that it's not perfect in Russia. They are adjusting. There are difficulties. I don't want to pretend that it's everything's roses, but the notion that Russia that is defeated nation is absurd in the extreme. Russia is going to win on the battlefield.
Putin fired back in a really big way today against the West. All right, we know that the West has been waging an all-out proxy war against Russia. There's no surprise there. We know that the West has been waging an all-out economic war against Russia, but now they're trying to wage a commodities-based war, which I guess is kind of an integral part to this economic war, all right? But the commodities-based war puts the United States and the West, London, Wall Street, the World Economic Forum, G7, EU, all these entities and more in an extremely disadvantageous situation. I think is probably a pretty light way of putting just how royally fucked the West is in this given part of the economic war, the commodities war. Because look, we've been talking about this for quite some time. We are about to go through a commodities boom. The next 8 years are going to be a commodities boom. And who are the commodities producers? It's China, it's Russia, it's India, it's BRICS nations, it's SCO nations. Okay, they're the commodities producers. It's Saudi Arabia, it's Qatar, it's all these nations, okay? The United States and London have put their bets on hyper-financialized markets, service economies that do nothing, produce nothing. There is no, added value. There's no surplus value in what we produce here in the United States. It's all just bets on hyper-financialized markets, and it's about to collapse. Okay, so the fact that the West, who doesn't produce commodities really, compared to these nations in terms of percentage of GDP, is going to try and wage a commodities-based war against the commodities-producing nations is not a good idea. Why would you do that? What makes you think, the West, that you can control commodities prices if you are not a commodities major producer? The answer is they can't, and they're learning that the hard way. Although I don't really know if it's the hard way because, again, it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. Now we find ourselves at a very interesting point in global political tensions, okay? Because right now, the West has decided that they are going to place a price cap on not just Russian oil, but also Russian gas, all right? Obviously, that has upset a lot of the OPEC plus member states. The idea of putting a price cap on Russian oil, that's never going to fly over with the people who are actually producing the globe's oil. But that's exactly what they did. And right off the bat, we saw a very aggressive response from nations like China. China said that they were going to ignore the West's Russian oil price cap. We talked about this. Trading crude above the $60 limit set by Western countries could mean Moscow is covering freight and insurance expenses. And they said, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do this. We also saw that India said, no, we're not going to adhere to this Russian oil price cap. This is ludicrous. All right, what makes you think that we are going to adhere to your silly rules that are going to hurt us? Saudi Arabia, they said the same thing. No, why would we adhere to a Russian oil price cap imposed on the alleged so-called lovers of the free market? Everyone was still waiting, though, to see how Putin would respond to the idea of a Russian oil price cap. Well, we just saw their response today, and this is what Russia has decided to do. Breaking news. Putin has decided to ban all oil sales to Western nations that are attempting to impose a price cap on Russian oil. So, you want your price cap? You say you're not going to pay us for, what it's worth? Think about that. Russia is saying we are going to produce oil and it costs us this much to produce it. And the West is saying, okay, well, we're going to buy it at, 10, 20% below whatever production is. On top of that, what we all have to understand is that Russia's got to pay for insurance on shipping. Russia's got to pay for the shipping. And how are we going to expect them to pay for all this stuff if they're literally losing out on each sale? We can't. Why would they subsidize the Western imperialists that are trying to take down their country? It just doesn't make sense. So Putin said, okay, you want to play hardball? Let's play hardball. Let's play hardball. Oh, you want to impose your little price cap thing after January 1st, 2023? Sorry, anyone who's attempting to do this, we're just going to stop providing you oil from the get-go. We'll provide India with the oil, and India will refine the oil, and India will sell the oil to you at a 2 to 3 times marked up price of whatever your price cap was going to be, and you're going to have to buy it because you have no other options. This certainly is going to help China. It's certainly going to help Russia, and it is certainly going to royally fuck the G7 and EU member states who are attempting to impose this cap on Russian oil and gas. But that's not all. That's not all. You might be thinking now, well, okay, Jackson, Russia and China are coordinating to try and hurt the EU and G7 as the EU and G7 took this unprecedented move of placing a price cap on Russian oil and gas. But how are China and Russia's own economies standing up to the test right now? Russian business firms are reporting an improved business climate right now. So half of the largest Russian companies have reported an improvement in business conditions in the country, and 3/4 expect the situation to continue to improve in 2023. Okay, so 49% of Russian business owners noted an improvement in the state of their business over the past 6 months. Russia's economy is great. China's economy is great. Okay. The West is a shell of what it once was. And if you don't believe me, take it from Vladimir Putin himself, who had some thoughts on the status, the well-being, the health of the United States, of Wall Street, of London, of all these G7, EU, WEF institutions that are rotting to their core. Okay, because I think he puts it better than I could. Take a listen to what President Vladimir Putin of Russia has to say about this matter. Our armed forces and their combat capabilities are growing constantly, day by day, and this process will undoubtedly build momentum, he has to say. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, continue on. Our neighbors in Ukraine, on the other hand, will soon have nothing except foreign handouts in the form of cash, weapons, and ammunition. Only handouts, he says. In Russia, the situation is completely different. We have everything. I want to emphasize this. We have everything we need to build up our military power potential. Okay? And we certainly are going to do this without cutting any slack. Moreover, unlike many other countries, we will rely on our own scientific, technological, and manufacturing base and human resources to do so. Putin is just laying it out quite clearly. At some point, yes, Ukraine is going to be dead out of luck. You cannot rely on the West for oil. You cannot rely on the West for gas. You cannot rely on the West for electricity. You cannot rely on the West for your electrical grid infrastructure. You cannot rely on the West for supplying your country with food. You cannot rely on the West for supplying your country with whatever you need, gold, silver. You need these resources to build a nation, to take a nation from its knees to where Russia is headed right now, to success, to economic prosperity for the masses. You cannot do that. China knows that. Russia knows that. People like Lyndon LaRouche know that. Henry Carey knew that. We know what works. We know what doesn't work. These hyper-financialized markets where you're doing, I don't even know what it's like. They try to explain this stuff. You want to know why no one in America and no one in the United Kingdom understands what's going on with our economy right now? Let me give it to you quite simply. The reason why no one understands what's happening with our economy is because they're making it up as they go. They're making it up as they go. They make up the gender politics as they go. They make up the racial politics as they go. They make everything up as they go. It's like a giant game that they're playing, and they change the rules every 5 minutes, okay? Because they understand they're losing. Only losers change the rules every 5 minutes when they see that they're losing a little bit more and a little bit more. And, oh, you have another country that's, aligning with Russia. Oh, geez, now Saudi Arabia is aligning with Russia. Oh, no, now Qatar is aligning with China. They understand what's happening. They understand they're losing. That's why they keep trying to change the rules. Russia and China understand that the rules are quite clear. If you have the commodities needed to build a strong nation, if you have a strong population, if you have an educated population, if you have a population that is committed to securing economic prosperity for the masses, you will eventually have prosperity. Okay? Now, the biggest way that China and Russia are trying to subvert Western dominance and influence is, of course, by investing in heavily and, mining for all these commodities, things like lithium, things like oil, gas. But the biggest one of all, the most important one of all, is gold. So what Russia is trying to do is create a new gold-backed ruble. Okay, they want to tie it to 5,000 rubles per gram of gold, something like that. The details don't matter. What matters is the reason why Russia and China are doing this right now is because they understand that if they achieve a new international currency that replaces the US petrodollar, they will win. And they're not stopping there. Okay, Russia holds the fifth largest gold and foreign currency reserves as of today. Russian investment in precious metal is continuing to surge. We saw that through September. They were reporting that they had a yearly surge of nearly 56%, according to the latest statistics published by the Bank of Russia when that was reported back in September. We also see that Russia and China are leading the effort to move to this new gold standard, okay? In the latest episode of Kaiser Report's annual Summer Solution series, Max and Stacy talk about government's endless money printing and a global hyperinflation in fiat currency, okay? You're not going to have the tanking of these national currencies in Russia or China when they tie them to a new gold standard. This is what Libya tried to do. This is what Muammar Gaddafi tried to do, and this is why they did what they did to him, okay? Now, the reason why this is so important today and why I want to draw this up today is because we just saw, and it was very sad, but we just saw yesterday that AFRICOM, which is led by the United States, announced that they had launched the largest set of airstrikes in Somalia throughout the Biden administration, okay? The U.S. launched at least 3 airstrikes in Somalia this month. They killed 6 in their latest airstrike on Somalia. All these African nations, this is where the hub of gold mining is currently taking place. So you might be wondering, Jackson, where is Russia? Where is China? Where are they getting all this gold? The real reason why they are so concerned with maintaining ties with Africa is because, A, the West ties with Africa are extremely, extremely torn, and they understand that Africa is where the gold lies. So if you have access and you can help them, basically mine their gold, and you're going to be getting a percentage of that, you are opening up a new doorway to not just creating a gold-backed currency for yourself, but also creating a new world of opportunity for all these African nations, all right? So take a look at this right now. It's not just that they're airstriking all these innocent Africans. Biden faces African resistance on anti-Russia stance. All right, so they see that Russia's helping them invest in gold, and this is creating quite the dilemma. U.S. President Joe Biden has opened a Washington summit with nearly 50 African nations. He's pledging increased investment in aid at a time when he's also reportedly struggling to keep the continent's leaders on board with his campaign to punish and isolate Russia over the Ukraine conflict. You might remember that Lavrov had a very successful set of meetings with leading African nations that are trying to create a new Africa, African Union, these sorts of things that Muammar Gaddafi envisioned. Whereas when Joe Biden tried to get African leaders to meet with Zelensky, like only 3 of them came. It was absolutely embarrassing. The battle for Bakhmut is the single most important battle that is currently raging on in the war in Ukraine, and Russian forces have entered into deep Bakhmut. Ukrainian forces are trying to get as many volunteers and reservists, even those who have never fired a weapon before, to the front lines in Bakhmut to protect the city and what's left of the city and Ukrainian holdouts there. But it doesn't look like it's going well for them. Many on both Ukrainian and Russian sides have described the situation as a meat grinder for Ukrainian military personnel. And one person who had some thoughts on the situation in Bakhmut and some thoughts about the Ukrainian government as a whole is none other than Andrew Milburn. Now, you guys probably remember Andrew Milburn. If you don't, he's the founder of the Mozart Group. Okay, so famously or infamously, depending on how you see the situation, the Mozart Group was this U.S.-led proxy force that was led by, I believe he was a Colonel Andrew Milburn. I'm pretty sure he was like a Marine commander. He was a Marine commander, okay? So he led this Mozart Group, and it was an effort to, combat the Russian Wagner Group. And, it's the play with the names Mozart Wagner. And so he led this group, and it was doing a lot of fighting, not the main fighting in Bakhmut on the side of the Ukrainians, but it was made up of a lot of foreign mercs. And Andrew Milburn, I don't know if he's still fighting, if he took a break, if, the Mozart Group is still there in large numbers. We don't really know. But what we do know is that Andrew Milburn, again, this Marine commander who was leading the Mozart Group in Ukraine, got absolutely sloshed on this podcast he did with some other, U.S. Special Forces or UK, I don't know who they are. There's some special forces from the West. And amongst many other things that we're going to discuss, he said that Ukraine is run by fucked up people. This is an instructor for the Ukrainian military, Marine commander leading the Mozart Group in the most important fight in the Ukraine war right now. And he said that Ukraine is led by fucked up people, in addition to some other incredibly disastrous PR nightmare statements. So let's take a look at this 2-minute clip of a longer interview in which he gets sloshed, drinking some good old whiskey, and he discusses his real thoughts and opinions about Ukraine.
It's a corrupt, fucked up society. So I'm not a big fan of Ukraine. Oh, what is that?
This is Buffalo Trace.
Okay. And the Ukrainians are in violation of the Hague Convention. They're insane.
I like how he just casually is like, yeah, the Ukrainians are definitely in violation of the Hague Convention. But, I still wear their lapel pins. I still support them. Slava Ukraini, going to fight for them, risking my life to fight for them, risking all these foreign mercs' lives to fight for them. But they're definitely in violation of the Hague Convention. So let's hear how he views their violation of the Hague Convention.
I forget the exact phraseology, but it is, we looked at this closely, and it's, there should be no filming of, the phrase, the terminology is bringing attention, blah, 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 to media. And yes, the Ukrainians are violating that, absolutely. They're filming of a number of things that they're doing with POWs is violating law of armed conflict, and you can't, guys.
Right.
Killing Russian prisoners is
right, and it's interesting because in the past, in you like Latin America or whatever, if U.S. Forces or employees were involved with any force that committed war atrocities or whatever,
back, right?
You have to, you're done.
Yeah.
But we're obviously not going to pull our support from Ukraine at this time.
Yeah, no. They committed atrocities. They violated the Hague Convention. They're killing people who are surrendering, POWs that are surrendering to them. They're shooting them in the knees and watching them bleed out. They're pissing on their corpses. They're, calling their mothers as they kill them. Just typical Hague violation convention stuff. But of course, that's not going to stop us from supporting them, because this is about what? It's about what? What is this about again?
These violations.
It's atrocities. No,
Yeah.
I mean, it still is. I mean, you shouldn't kill dudes who, everyone knows who surrendered. And there was plenty
You shouldn't, but you did.
of that. But my point is, it's not about Ukraine. We're not like, I happen to have, Ukraine flag tied to my bag, but I'm not, oh my God, Ukraine's so awesome. No, because I understand that there are plenty fucked up people running Ukraine.
Got the Ukraine flag tied to his back, but, you know, he's not all, you know, oh, I love Ukraine. Like, you kind of are. I mean, you're risking your life to go fight for them in the most important battle that's currently raging on right now in the war. But again, what is this all about? What is this all about? Because we've heard from the West that this is about, you know, Putin invading a sovereign state. We hear this is about Putin, the next Hitler. But what is this really about?
It's not about that. It's about global norms, right?
Right.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I love me some global norms. You know, it's not really about it's not really about Putin. It's not about this. It's not about that. It's not about Slavic cocaine. It's you know, it's about global norms. It's about global norms. It's about global norms. Preserving global norms. Rules-based international order. Now, let's get a raise of hands. Who understands what global norms is? Anyone? Okay, no one can tell me what global norm. Okay, well, who can tell me what international law is? International law. Can anyone tell? International law, like the Hague Convention? Like the thing that this guy who's fighting for the Ukrainians literally said that they regularly violate on a daily basis, the Ukrainian military, not the Russian military. He didn't say the Russian military does it. He says the Ukrainian military that he's fighting alongside with hand in hand is regularly violating the Hague Convention, international laws, not rules-based norms, because that's bullshit. No one knows what that means. That's made up, jibber jabber from the West. Oh, we care about the rules-based norms. You literally had to make up a fake, fictitious international order and rules-based norms, whatever this means, because you're in violation of actual international law, the UN Charter, the Hague Convention, on such a prolific, continuous basis that you had to make up your own bullshit. Okay, this is what I said in our last story. The only reason why they make up this stuff, why they continue to change the rules every 5 minutes, is because they're losing. Okay. Marine Commander Andrew Milburn, leader of the Mozart group in Ukraine, admits to the fact that the Ukrainian military is in violation of international law on a daily basis, if you can believe it. Yeah. I don't know what's crazier about this next story. The fact that Volodymyr Zelensky is now wearing a new article of clothing, or the fact that he's calling for peace negotiations. Ukraine Zelensky seeks Indian Prime Minister Modi's help with peace plan. I don't know what was wrong with Erdogan's help back in April before this madness really got out of control, but apparently he doesn't want to work with Erdogan anymore. He wants to work with Modi. So yes, he's apparently seeking a new peace formula, and he's counting on India's participation in its implementation. Okay, so he issued a new 10-point peace formula to the G20 summit in Bali, Indonesia. And you know what's so crazy about this? So what's so crazy about this is that Zelensky's coming out and he's like, I want to work with Modi, and I have a new peace plan. And I don't want Russia to be involved in the negotiations. Definitely not. Yep. Ukraine is calling for a UN-brokered peace summit without Russia. Moscow would only be invited after facing international prosecution, Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba has said. This is being announced on the same exact day that one of the most important U.S. mercenary groups, the Mozart Group in Ukraine, their commander, who's a former U.S. Marine commander, came out and said that the Ukrainian military is run by fucked up people, and the military is regularly committing Hague Convention violations. Same day. I mean, it really just is crazy what they're suggesting. They're saying, oh, we need to have a peace deal. We need to have peace between our nations to bring an end to this war. But we're not going to allow Russia to join the table. What's Russia's response to that? That's ludicrous. It'd be a lot more sensible if we didn't allow Ukraine at the table in this, because Ukraine is just a Western military hub at this point.
The Russian Federation has a policy of no first use of nuclear weapons. A very sane, very sensible policy. The United States, under Joe Biden has abandoned the idea of no first use of nuclear weapons, which really enables the United States now, under present doctrine, to launch a nuclear surprise attack on nations that fall out of favor with us, and essentially to carry out a nuclear Pearl Harbor, where we would have the ability to rain down hydrogen bombs on St. Petersburg and Moscow, and just obliterating pedestrians and motorists using the streets. There is this element of madmen, some of them politicians, some of them military people, many of them in the U.S. State Department, the Central Intelligence Agency, who would be willing to do the most reckless and insane of actions to risk nuclear weapons or nuclear war, or even to initiate it. Earlier in the year, we saw where Ukraine was working a false flag attack, which you and I are both most familiar with. Ukraine actually tried to foster this idea of a dirty bomb attack by Russia, but I think because we were able to highlight it, they weren't able to carry that out. We've always got to be watchful for these false flag attacks. And at the same time, there are, within the foreign policy and deep state establishment, there is an element that is prepared to risk a nuclear war, engage in one, if necessary, in the idea that somehow we would come out on top. Russia has close to 6,000 nuclear warheads. About 1,500 are sort of in an immediate standby mode at any given time. Just a few Russian nuclear submarines that would survive no matter what we do would be able to rain down a tremendous nuclear attack on the United States and on all of the NATO countries in Europe. If you look at the uproar that they caused in the media about the fact that after Ukraine had been attacking the Donbass for seven or more years, Russia finally entered the war on the side of Donbass. And the outrage was over the fact that Russia had crossed a sovereign national border. Well, you and I know this idea that somehow it's unforgivable to cross a sovereign nation's border. The United States is unlawfully occupying northern Syria today to steal the wheat and the oil from Syria in order to impose a great famine on the country, which they have done. We've crossed borders in Libya, in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Yemen. We cross borders all the time. There's hardly a year we don't cross borders. And yet, when Russia did it in order to defend the Russian-speaking people in the Donbass area and in Crimea, suddenly it became outrageous. They created this national hysteria over something that we do on a routine basis, which is to cross national borders. The Lugansk and Donetsk declared the independence of their republics after they were subjected to tyrannical measures by the revolutionary junta that took power in Kiev in 2014, thanks to Central Intelligence Agency, British MI6, which turned protests into a violent revolution, which then began, killing, just slaughtering Russian-speaking Ukrainians. They went into the Donbass. They were very notorious, and they cornered Russian-speaking people in buildings and then burned them down.
Yeah.
There's one fellow who managed to jump out of a burning building. He broke his leg, and then the mob of Ukrainian nationalists surrounded him, beat him to death. In any event, the war that Ukraine has waged against the Donbass is wholly unjust.
Yeah.
There is no justification for it. And Americans are told, well, this whole thing started on February 24th of this year. It didn't. It started when President Obama made the decision to overthrow the government, the legitimate, duly elected government of Ukraine, and carried out a coup in 2014. And then, under the umbrella of the Minsk peace accords, which everybody was hoping would bring peace, and we flooded offensive weapons, very advanced weapons, and we built up a very powerful Ukrainian army with the express purpose, with the determination of attacking Russia. There were elements in NATO and within the globalist movement, the deep state, and the foreign policy establishment, all of them casting a greedy eye on Russia with its immense natural resources. We would like to be able to overthrow Russia, and we would like to be able to pick up their resources, have the boys from Davos move in and buy up what they want, get it cheaply, and become trillionaires and mega billionaires. Understandably, the Russian people don't want to accept that.
Most people don't know that prior to February 2022, 8 years prior to it, Ukraine has been warring on the Donbass. I knew when I wrote an article in April, I looked at official statistics from the DPR and the LPR, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. And at that time, end of March, around 8,000 civilians, just civilians, not defenders, not soldiers, but civilians alone had been killed. Now, in a press conference held just on Wednesday, referring to the Joint Center for Control and Coordination, they gave the shocking statistic that since the special military operation began and since so mid-February, Ukrainian shelling have killed 4,500 civilians and injured over 4,000. And that's just this year. I mean, that's a huge increase. And of course, we'll never hear about that in the media. And having been going to the Donbass frequently this year, pretty much every month this year, I spend 3 weeks, then I come back here, I spend 3 or 4 weeks, then I go back, etc. Every time I've been there, there's been intense shelling of the city, not just of Donetsk, but also Gorlivka, Makivka, other cities. But if we're speaking only of the capital city, Donetsk, the very heart of the city has been shelled by weapons, including NATO weapons. And I know you can elaborate more on this than I can, but they're being sent to residential areas and pedestrian areas and parks and markets. Every month that I've been there, there's been devastating scenes of civilians' bodies strewn throughout the streets, body parts throughout the streets. In June, Ukrainian shelling targeted a maternity hospital. In late July, Ukraine fired rockets containing petal mines, each rocket containing over 300 petal mines. These mines are still maiming civilians. Nearly 90 civilians have been maimed by them. And I guess my lead up with all this information is you're aware of it, I'm aware of it, but the way the media is portraying it is A, to completely whitewash these crimes. B, if they ever even mention scenes from Donetsk, they take them and then they depict them as being in Ukraine under Russian shelling. And then otherwise, as we well know, I know I've seen you've done interviews on the Bucha massacre, which was committed by Ukrainian forces, to completely vilify Russia, say comparing how the US operates, how Ukraine operates. Are these similar warfare tactics, or is there a difference?
From what I know, that the Russian forces have followed the laws of war. I know that from the command level, there is no support for anyone who commits violations of the laws of war. You mentioned Bucha, and I found that very interesting because, you know, I was a career prosecutor. I was the head of the criminal law division in the Pentagon, responsible for criminal prosecutions within the Army worldwide. I sort of have a way of looking at crime scenes in a very rational way. When you see a slaughter, a mass slaughter, it is generally you have people who are brought together in a place. That's where they're beheaded, or that's where they're gunned down, or whatever. This was interesting because in Bucha, the bodies didn't start appearing until 4 days after the Russians left. The mayor of the city proclaimed, you know, glory, hallelujah, the Russians have been driven out. There was not a mention of any slaughter, anything of that sort. Then all of a sudden, 4 days after the Ukrainian psychological operations troops entered the city, dead people started appearing on the streets. All of them right on the side of the street with their hands zip tied behind them, just the same way that the Ukrainian soldiers zip tie all of their prisoners. And it was interesting because you look at the armbands that were worn by these civilians who were laying dead there. The custom at the time, if someone was a Ukrainian sympathizer, they would wear a blue armband. If they were either a Russian sympathizer or simply just totally neutral, they'd wear a white armband. All of the armbands were white. None of them were blue. Why weren't Ukrainian sympathizers killed? Why only Russian sympathizers? Why would the Russians choose to kill Russian sympathizers as they're leaving town? Now, if the Russians were going to do that, now why would they wait until they're leaving town to gun people down? And why would they choose to lay them down like monuments along the road as clear evidence that they had done it? The whole thing was such a total transparent fraud that it was just amazing that mainstream, the corporate media, journalists totally overlooked it and assumed that, oh, well, this must have been Russians because the Ukrainians told us it was Russians who did it.
Yeah.
So it was fraudulent. My guess is that what happened is that after the Ukrainian army moved in, they identified those people who had worked together with the Russians or perhaps given them food, water, whatever, and they took them out and they executed them, which they're very famous for doing.
Yeah.
And then they blamed it on the other side. And the Western media just simply became a megaphone amplifying the lies that they were publishing. It's important for people to understand that Russia went into this war. They didn't want to go in. This was not some grand plan. President Putin was forced into kind of a last minute decision to go in. Russia had desperately worked to avoid war. they had put proposals on the table with NATO, and meanwhile, Ukraine, with the help of NATO, was preparing a massive assault on the Donbass. They were going to slaughter Russian people in the Donbass. And President Putin said, okay, we've got to do something to stop it. And he launched his attack in order to break up the momentum and the drive towards attacking the Donbass. And he was successful in that. But Russia went in with a very small force of men. They didn't have nearly the 3-to-1 advantage that an attacker has to have under standard military doctrine. This is widely known, common military doctrine. The attacker has a 3-to-1 advantage. Well, I'm not sure that Russia even had a 1-to-1 ratio. It was very understaffed. Russia ordered mobilization. It's the first time they have ordered mobilization. The mobilization went very smoothly, despite all the stuff you hear about it. There were Russians who left to avoid the draft. Same thing happened to the United States during the Vietnam War. A lot of people went to Canada to avoid the draft. Massive numbers of Ukrainians fled the country to avoid the draft. I mean, a major proportion of the entire population of Ukraine. So to get all worked up about the fact that some Russians have evaded the draft really detracts from the fact that the mobilization was extremely successful. There were many people who simply volunteered to join. So they're no longer, defending against much greater forces. Now they're a pretty robust force on the front line. Russia now has an adequate force. Their supplies are coming in very smoothly. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians have not figured out how to defend against the drone attack. The Patriot missile systems, that's not going to do it, because each Patriot missile costs $3 million. Each drone costs $30,000. The Iranian drones have proven to create a dilemma for NATO. If you can knock out a $3 million product with a $30,000 product, it's not going to work for Ukraine. We're reaching a point in the war where in the north, the ground is it's frozen solid to where tanks can move cross country. They can get off the roads where they can be much safer. That hasn't happened yet around the Donbass, but as time goes on, the frozen earth will work its way from the north to the south. What I anticipate is that Russia will look and say, okay, we've paralyzed the electrical system of Ukraine. Mm-hmm. They don't have an effective defense. Over time, countries do develop effective defenses. And we've seen this happen different times during the war with the HIMARS system that the US sent in. It was very difficult to deal with at first. Now, somehow, magically, the Russians have figured out how to shoot down HIMARS missiles, and they've been pretty effective at it. There's a chance that NATO and Ukraine will come up with a solution to this drone problem. So I think the time may be right for Russia to act. I suspect it will be during the winter, while the foliage is off of the trees, making it much more difficult for NATO to launch long-range attacks at the Russians. I say NATO, but the HIMARS systems are operated probably by Blackwater type mercenaries working for the U.S. government, but experienced military personnel. So I think the time is right for a Russian advance. I think the Russian people are prepared to make the sacrifices necessary to win the war. I think the time is now for Russia to move forward and to end the war. That's what I anticipate will happen.
In the 1990s, there were debates everywhere about the future, so nothing was set in some hard and certain course. And in the US, the more we learn and the more we look back, there were debates between the neocons and those who really had the view that, of course, we can have normal relations with Russia. And those debates really did center on the NATO question. We had hardliners, of course, at the end of the George W. Bush senior administration, and I ran into them in a hard way because when I advised Poland, I knew a lot about how to end a financial crisis, and I made good recommendations, and they worked. But what was fascinating for me, and I didn't understand it at the time, is every recommendation I made was accepted by the White House almost immediately. It was weird. One day I raised $1 billion for Poland, literally from morning till night, because I said so. And they said, well, do you think this will work, Mr. Sachs? And I said, this is the right thing to do. And by the end of the day, the billion had been raised for a currency stabilization fund. And I patted myself on the back. God, am I good, And then 2 years later, when I made very similar recommendations for Yeltsin's government, every single one of them was rejected. And I thought, but come on, you just saw in Poland why this works, how it works, and so forth. I didn't really get at the time that I was playing economics and they were playing geopolitics. I was trying to help salvage a collapsing economy, and they were playing the board game Risk. Put your pieces on as many places on the board as you can.
We've got a lot more to talk about today. Someone in the Rumble chat just said it's Blue Dot versus Belt and Road Initiative. Okay, well, the Blue Dot Initiative, whatever the Biden administration crafted up, when I saw that, I called Samir Khan because Samir Khan follows this stuff very closely. And I said, Samir, what's up with this Blue Dot alternative that Biden is attempting to put forward in replace of the Belt and Road Initiative? And she basically was like, oh yeah, they do that every couple of years. They give absolutely no money to any of these, Latin American or African nations that they try to work with on their Blue Dot Belt and Road Initiative alternative. They give far less money than China. China just gives these nations money, says, here's some fiscal investment. We're going to help you develop, high-speed rail, whatever, oil, gas infrastructure, whatever. And the nations are like, yes, that's a lot of money. You're just giving us this money for development. And you're not trying to strangle us with debt like the IMF, for example. And we're happy to work with you. Mutually beneficial relationships, right? The United States, on the other hand, will say, okay, so here's far less money than what China's going to give you. And if you don't adhere to all of the, regulations and quotas and rules-based norms that we have set about surrounding, then we're not going to give you the money. So it's like, it really is no competition. Blue Dot versus Belt and Road. Belt and Road Initiative wins, 10 out of 10 times in every nation that they go to, because it's so simple. There's no debate there. There's no competition there. It's not a competition.